Subcommittee of Financial Services and General Government will come to order. This is the first hearing of the 119th Congress. Members will have 5 legislative days with which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material into the record. I know I speak for Mr. Hoyle when I say thank you all for being here this morning. We'll now introduce and hear from our colleagues today. First was Congressman Sarah Elfreth, representing Maryland's 3rd District. Did I hammer that?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, thank you. Val Hoyle, representing Oregon's 4th District, when and if she gets here. Congressman Hillary Scholten, representing Michigan's 3rd District. Congresswoman Nikki Budzinski, representing Illinois' 13th District. The inimitable Congressman Dina Titus, representing Nevada's 1st District, and also co-chair of the Cannabis Caucus. And Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury, representing New Mexico's 1st District. And I will recognize Mr. Hoyer for an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Witnesses for being here. Look forward to hearing from them. Mr. Chairman, as you and I have discussed, given what is happening in government today, this committee has particular relevance in that so much activity is being done with the Treasury Department, particularly IRS, with OMB, with the White House budget and DOGE. I'm not sure where DOGE comes. We'll find that out, I suppose. And with GSA, I just saw the list of buildings that they want to put up for possible sale. And for the past 6 weeks, America's watched Donald Trump and Russell Vought and Elon Musk and their DOGE disruptors wreak havoc throughout the federal government. DOGE has acted without, in my opinion, and the court's opinion, in many cases, statutory authority, without transparency, without regard to the law, without any understanding of how their actions hurt the American people, and crucially, without any oversight from this Congress. I would hope, and because I think we have that responsibility as a first of the co-equals in government, the Article 1 agency, we have the responsibility to oversee, particularly in light of so many cases. I see this morning, one of the first headlines I read was that the Supreme Court ruled that contrary to DOGE's direction or somebody's direction, federal U.S. aid abroad could not be stopped by them. This ought to concern every member of this body. Mr. Chairman, I know you're concerned about it, and I expect many will express these concerns before us today. As a subcommittee that oversees DOGE's funding, we have a duty to get to the bottom of what it is doing. DOGE has sacked federal employees without knowing what they do. No sooner had DOGE fired certain employees, from healthcare providers for 9/11 first responders to workers who maintain our nuclear arsenal, than it had to start rehiring them because they were necessary. Uncredentialed DOGE disruptors have forced their way into secure government systems and taken the American people's highly sensitive data, including their Social Security numbers, home addresses, immigration status, credit card information, health records, IRS earning records, and more. Now, very frankly, we're not sure where that information went. If it went to private servers, however, that's clearly against the law, and we need to make sure that did not happen. We do not know the full extent of this breach because DOGE continues to operate essentially out of the public eye. What little information they provide is dubious at best. And let me say as an aside, we heard a string of facts that must have taken 5 minutes about Social Security. Absolutely false. Those folks are not being paid, unfortunately, because their computer operation is so old. If they strike them, it affects the whole system. So while they now no longer pay them, they're still on the rolls. And obviously, maybe some young kid, I don't know, got in there, saw they were on the rolls, hypothesized that they were still being paid, Not true. It didn't, and it would have taken 5 minutes to find out that that was not true. Doge has over-reported its savings as well, that the president mentioned yesterday, in billions and billions of dollars. In the past week, Doge erased or altered more than 1,000 of the supposedly canceled contracts it had listed on its website. Now, my presumption is because they found out they made a mistake, and they're moving so quickly, so rapidly, with essentially people with little knowledge, like the 19-year-old kid who was hired and fired. That's about 40% of all the contracts listed on Doge's site, Mr. Chairman. That includes the 5 largest purported cuts, which were all found to be inaccurate. It remains unclear how much, if any, Doge has saved American taxpayers. We need to get rid of fraud, waste, and abuse, period. And we all agree on that. I'm sure there's nobody on the committee who wouldn't agree with that. Doge will more likely end up costing Americans more for fewer services as the Trump administration turns to privatization and contractors to pick up slack. Mr. Chairman, it's very easy to say we're not doing this with federal employees, but the service needs to be done, put it in contractors, as if that didn't cost more money, because obviously there's more overhead and a profit, presumably, with the contractors. You're about to gavel me down. We need to remind Doge that it is accountable to the Congress and to the American people. That is vital not only to countering these destructive policies, but also to preserving this institution's authority and power. That's what the founders had in mind. We have the power of the purse, not the president. And I've got some other comments here that I will submit to the record because I don't want to tread on the chairman's patience. But I do want to say, Mr. Chairman, you and I have a very good relationship. I have great respect for you. And I believe that this committee, by circumstance, has an extraordinary responsibility. And I look forward to working with you to carry out that responsibility.
Thank you. I truly appreciate the gentleman and respect you deeply. But it's tough to hold the other folks accountable to 5 minutes when we're not holding ourselves to the same standards. That's all. I listen to you. I'm glad to listen to you anytime in private or when we have a more open session. With that, Representative Elfreth, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Ranking Member Hoyer. I will deviate from the Maryland tradition and try to stick to my 5 minutes, if that's okay. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. My name is Congresswoman Sarah Elfreth, and I have the privilege of representing Maryland's 3rd Congressional District, which is just a stone's throw away. As this committee well knows, I don't have to tell you, our civil servants are the backbone of the services that hundreds of millions of Americans rely on every single day. As the daughter of 2 civil servants, I personally understand the vital role that they play, and as the representative of 44,000 federal employees, I am seeing, along with my colleagues from Maryland on this panel, I'm seeing the devastating impacts of Doge's cuts in the community every single day when I go home. The work of this subcommittee is critical to federal employees across our country. Of course, you are responsible for the epicenter of a lot of the turmoil happening right now, the agencies at that epicenter: OPM, Postal Service, Treasury, IRS, White House, and OMB. Each day, the current administration's plan to dismantle the civil service seems to target a new portion of our federal workforce. It's hard to even keep up with it as members of Congress, let alone I can't imagine how the public can. The recent attacks on probationary employees, I want to focus on that today, especially impact workers of my generation, folks who are early and mid-career, folks who landed their dream jobs and just want to serve their communities in this nation, folks who will be the next generation of leaders in our civil service. These workers were arbitrarily fired for no cause whatsoever over the Valentine's Day weekend. They were shut off from their work. They were not given 2 weeks' notice. They were not given severance pay. These are people with children in school, with mortgages to pay, with parents to take care of. These are patriots who serve their country every single day, and yet they were tossed to the curb and told to not let the door hit them on the way out. Frankly, it was demoralizing, it is illegal, and it's unimaginable for so many of the people that I serve and we all serve together, these hardworking civil servants. Currently, there's no uniform provision in statute that guarantees if these probationary employees are reinstated by court action or mistakes that we have seen DOGE make over the course of the last few weeks, reinstated because they erred. There's no protection for these civil servants on probationary status for them to be able to re-enter their work and not have to start the clock over again. And so I believe this is a gap in our law. I plan to introduce a bill next week to provide that protection. Very simple. If a civil servant was fired for probationary status and they are reinstated, they can keep the time that they have served instead of starting over again. It's just common sense legislation, and I ask that this language be included in the subcommittee markup as well. This committee has the opportunity to do right by our civil servants who ensure that our drinking water is clean, our food and drugs are safe, our weather is forecasted, and Social Security checks go out on time. I ask that you include language in the FY26 bill that reinstates all probationary employees fired since January 20th, 2025, and ensures when these employees are reinstated, they will not need to, again, restart their probationary period for the same job they previously held and served in. We have seen the latest reports. The administration intends to continue to illegally remove civil servants from their jobs, again, putting life-saving services for our constituents in the hands of political, frankly, unqualified political cronies, or to no one at all. The irony, of course, is that our civil service is the envy of the world. It was created to avoid the situation that we are rapidly entering into. This Congress recognized that cronyism and corruption did not serve the American people and did something about it back in 1883, and it's hard to believe that we can't remember history or the lessons of the past. For the future of our civil service and for the government that people, and for a government that people and our districts can depend on, I urge this committee to use every tool at your disposal to protect our federal workers from the onslaught of attacks of DOGE and this administration. And with that, Mr. Chair, I came in under and I yield my time back.
Thank you very much. That's admirable. Representative Scholten, you're next, please. We go in an order of attendance.
Oh, okay, sure.
You were kind enough to be here on time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hoyer, for holding this committee hearing. I want to start out by saying, I am here for fiscal responsibility. It is the principle that guides a lot of my representation. It is the beating heart of West Michigan that I represent. And I think that we are long overdue in this country for a hard look at our budget. We can't continue to run on a deficit. There are some positive things happening about looking at the ways that we can be more efficient. It's how I run my household. I think we should run our government the same way. However, I want to bring the subcommittee's attention to serious concerns that my constituents and I have about the Department of Government Efficiency. DOGE has amassed significant authority over federal operations, all while operating with minimal, almost no transparency and oversight. Congress needs to take a hard look at how DOGE is funded, what it's doing, and who is pulling the strings. The problem starts with funding. DOGE is receiving congressionally appropriated funds that were originally meant to support the U.S. Digital Service, an agency dedicated to improving government digital services to make federal services more accessible and efficient for the American people. But DOGE's activities have clearly expanded far beyond IT. When Mr. Musk showed up to a cabinet meeting wearing a T-shirt that said tech support and everyone laughed and jeered, the American people weren't laughing when they didn't have access to the information about what DOGE was doing and are suffering as a result of the actions. DOGE has taken on broad responsibilities that impact government operations, even regulatory process. In short, this is an agency with enormous influence, yet Congress and the public know very little about how it operates. Let's be clear, DOGE directly impacts taxpayer dollars. DOGE is making real decisions that are affecting hardworking Americans trying to make ends meet. And yet, it operates in the shadows, free from scrutiny and accountability. That is unacceptable. And if that weren't concerning enough, we have an outside, unelected billionaire, the president's top campaign donor, Elon Musk, making these decisions. Taxpayer dollars should not be subject to the influence of any unelected individual, no matter how rich they are or how much they gave to a campaign. That is why I introduced the CLEAR Act, which would ensure DOJ allows for public record requests and full accountability. We're not telling DOJ to even stop its actions. Just be accountable. Who can disagree with that? No president, Republican or Democrat, should be able to hide the actions of their administration from the American people. Government should work for the people, not in secret and not at the whim of billionaires. The government should not fund fraud. Full stop. I am 100% in favor of trimming waste out of our budget. The American people work hard for their money, and they have a right to know how their taxpayer dollars are being spent. And we in Congress have an immense responsibility to spend it wisely. DOJ has claimed to have found billions of dollars in waste and fraud, but the only publicly available ledger is full of inaccuracies and poor accounting in and of itself. They have not shared any credible evidence of those claims, and these publicly available receipts, as we mentioned, are full of errors. Just as I don't support funding fraud and waste, I don't support taking away someone's health care and Social Security on baseless accusations that there might be fraud somewhere. We need proof, and we need a process. That's why my bill, the CLEAR Act, is so important. I urge this subcommittee to take this issue seriously and support the CLEAR Act to ensure that no government office is allowed to operate in the dark. Congress has a responsibility to demand transparency, accountability, and integrity in our government. I ask for your support in making sure the taxpayer dollars are protected and that the power of knowledge remains where it belongs, with the American people. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much for 2 for 2 with people being succinct and getting in their 5 minutes. I hope you can follow up with that, Representative Budzinski. Thank you.
Do
You're
my
recognized for
best.
5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Ranking Member Hoyer, and I want to thank the members of this committee for the opportunity to testify today about.
1 second.
Sure, yes,
I just want to point out, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Budzinski has a specific experience very relevant to this committee, and she was the Chief of Staff at OMB.
I was. Thank you very much, Ranking Member. But today, actually, I'm here to talk about the United States Postal Service in particular, and the experiences the Illinois 13th District that I proudly represent has had with regards to recent on-time delivery performances. I, along with many of my constituents, am deeply concerned about the recent proposals to fire the Postal Service's Board of Governors and consolidate the Postal Service into the Department of Commerce. As you know, Congress established the Postal Service as an independent agency through the Postal Reorganization Act of 1970, granting Congress the sole authority to oversee its operations. This independence from political interference has made the Postal Service one of the most trusted institutions in government for nearly 5 decades. It is critical that Congress not cede this oversight authority over the Postal Service to any other branch of government. Additionally, I'm alarmed by recent proposals to fully privatize the Postal Service. Privatization would only harm the more than 640,000 postal employees across the country who work day in and day out to deliver our mail efficiently and with integrity, but would also threaten the reliable mail service for millions of Americans. Privatization would undermine the universal service obligation, leading to higher costs and delayed deliveries, especially in rural areas like the ones that I represent in Illinois. As you begin your work on fiscal year 2026 appropriations bill, I ask that you consider and continue to support USPS as an independent federal agency. Beyond the Postal Service's independence, there are several operational challenges within USPS that I hope you will also consider. The first issue relates to the downsizing and consolidation of processing and distribution centers across the country. I want to thank the subcommittee for including my report language request in fiscal year 25's report, which advised the Postal Service to halt the downsizing or consolidation of any processing and distribution centers in districts that are not meeting on-time delivery targets. Despite USPS leadership's decision to halt some consolidation, many facilities remain at risk, including the Springfield, Illinois Processing and Distribution Center, which handles much of the state government's ongoing mail, including paychecks, bills, and tax returns. I urge the committee to retain this language in this year's FSGG report. Secondly, I remain concerned about Postmaster General's Local Transportation Optimization Plan, often referred to as LTO. If implemented, this plan would reduce the frequency of mail pickups from local post offices that are more than 50 miles away from a regional processing and distribution center. The USPS itself has acknowledged that this proposal could cause mail delays of up to 24 hours for rural communities. And the USPS Inspector General has said that this plan has, quote, negatively impacted services to customers. A full implementation of the LTO plan would result in even worse delays for Americans who rely on the Postal Service across rural America. As such, I urge the committee to include language opposing the LTO plan in fiscal year 2026 FSGG report. My constituents are already suffering from mail that is delivered sometimes weeks late. This includes paychecks, bills, and even medicine. Congress must work together to ensure that any changes to the Postal Service are not made on the backs of millions of Americans that we all represent who rely on the Postal Service each and every day. Chairman Joyce and Ranking Member Hoyer, thank you again for this opportunity to provide testimony to the subcommittee here today. I look forward to working with you in the year ahead and these important priorities as you craft fiscal year 2026 appropriations bills. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. The chair will now recognize Representative Titus for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, for this opportunity. As you begin your work on the appropriations bill for fiscal year 2026, I'm just here to strongly urge you not to fund the Department of Government Efficiency that we call DOGE, or to codify any of its cuts. You know, ironically, last night the president was saying we're no longer going to give power to unelected bureaucrats, at which point the camera panned right to Elon Musk in a seat of honor. Now, he is an unelected bureaucrat. Elon Musk and his team at DOGE clearly don't know what they're doing, and the uncertainty for federal employees is maddening. One day you have a job, the next day you don't, then you do, but you got to move across country. This kind of uncertainty is no way to plan a life. As Mr. Hoyer pointed out, many of the claimed efficiencies and savings have also turned out not to be true and have had to be removed from that running tally of their so-called savings. So far, more than 200,000 probationary employees, meaning those who have been on the job for less than a year or have been recently promoted, have been fired. Last week, the National Park Service staff at Lake Mead National Recreation Area in my district were terminated with no notice. Now, we welcome 6 million visitors to Lake Mead every year. It has a great impact on our outdoor recreation economy. Now, not only will these workers, who are our friends and neighbors in my district, face financial uncertainty without employment, but the crucial roles they play in maintaining the park and keeping it operational are just going to fall to the wayside. DOGE has also targeted the U.S. Forest Service, who help fight wildfires everywhere, but certainly they are prevalent in the Southwest. They've targeted the CDC and USDA scientists who are fighting the spread of bird flu, which we are seeing now spread to cows and even people, IRS agents who are processing tax returns, it is tax season, and thousands of employees at the Department of Veterans Affairs. We've always said that we have a solemn oath to care for our veterans when they return home from deployment. Well, cutting the VA staffing levels, the very people charged with caring for our veterans, breaks that promise that we've made. Now, on top of that, just generally speaking, 6,000 federal workers have served in the armed forces. They're veterans themselves. Probationary employees are often at the start of long careers in public service and have chosen to help their communities through this distinguished work. You don't become a government employee to make money, that's for sure. Now their careers are at the whims of a billionaire who's trying to fund his own tax breaks. That never gets discussed. If you ask me, laying off thousands of the nation's best and brightest is not a merit-based system. The long-term ramifications of this ill-advised policy can't be overstated. And that's just the beginning. Last week, the Office of Management and Budget and the Office of Personnel Management issued a memo to agency leaders with guidance on how to conduct large-scale layoffs in the near future. And in addition to initiating mass layoffs, Elon Musk and his inexperienced team at DOGE have taken steps to intimidate federal workers, including the use of threatening emails asking these hardworking air traffic controllers to stop and justify their jobs. What could be more ridiculous? Asking federal employees to detail their roles and responsibilities, indicate who they work for, who they report to, and send all of that information in an email is an immense national security risk. Our adversaries have been trying to map out our federal bureaucracy for years. Putting it all in writing and sending it via email does all the hard work for them. The Trump administration is also working to weaken essential worker protection institutions and protections. Trump has fired the National Labor Relations Board member, Ms. Wilcox, stripping the board of its quorum and inability to protect workers. Dismissed 2 Democratic commissioners and the EEOC. Both of these moves unprecedented and illegal. So I stand with our hardworking federal workforce and will do everything in my power to stop this illegal and unprecedented attack. We've introduced amendments to stop the funding of DOGE that didn't get heard, that got blocked in the budget hearing, co-sponsored legislation like the Taxpayer Protection Act to prevent individuals with clear conflicts of interest like Musk from interfering with Treasury operations. So as we do these things, I urge my colleagues on this committee to please stand up to Elon Musk. These federal workers provide essential services to our constituents. They need their help. They're not in it for any nefarious reasons, and I ask you to not gut them. That's not the way to provide those services.
Thank you for your testimony.
Took one of their seconds that they had left.
Fair enough. We'll now recognize Representative Hoyle for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Chairman Joyce, Ranking Member Hoyer, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify in front of your committee. We have crews ready to break ground on major infrastructure projects. They're waiting for work that might never come. We have apprenticeship and training programs for the next generation of workers that are completely stalled, and Washington, D.C.'s chaos has already cost us over a month in fire mitigation for our forests. This is what's happening right now, and American taxpayers are paying the price. Congress already made the decision, you all made the decision to spend money on these priorities. But we're here today watching the administration stall, delay, and ignore the law while small businesses and the people they employ wait, and projects that help our economy grind to a halt. And Congress is doing nothing to stop it. Congress holds the power of the purse. We're the closest representatives of the people, not the executive branch, and certainly not unelected bureaucrats. There's a process for reviewing, redirecting, or clawing back funding, but this administration is ignoring it with no regard for the law. Now, the law is clear. If the administration wants to withhold funding that we have already approved, it must follow the Impoundment Control Act. If it wants to review programs and recommend cuts, it can do so legally without stopping the funding. The president submits a budget every year for this reason. But this administration is outright ignoring the law. Congressional leadership has the power to hold the executive branch accountable, and we have the responsibility to hold the executive branch accountable because we are separate and equal parts of government. My constituents and the American people deserve to know why promised federal funding isn't reaching them and why their neighbors are being indiscriminately fired. If the administration continues to ignore Congress's will, then its budget should reflect that. This subcommittee can force the Executive Office of the President and the Office of Management and Budget to answer for cuts that weaken wage theft enforcement, stall job training programs, or delay wildfire response, among other things, and many other things. It can condition funding to ensure money is spent as Congress intended. It can even take more drastic measures like defunding these offices entirely. You have the tools to protect workers from politically motivated attacks. This subcommittee should increase funding for the Merit Systems Protection Board, Office of Special Counsel, and the Federal Labor Relations Authority to handle a surge in wrongful termination requests. No person, Democrat or Republican, should have unchecked power that allows them to circumvent our entire system of civil service protections. Attacks on these agencies hurt workers who don't have any recourse. The consequences if Congress doesn't act are real. Billions in federal payments to our farmers remain frozen. Funding to help our federal forests is drying up, and that's to say nothing of what's happening to the very real people who make these programs possible, federal workers. NOAA, which supports our commercial fishermen and helps detect wildfire threats, is hemorrhaging staff. Layoffs at the VA and at the Roseburg VA, where I represent, are leaving the hospitals with skeleton crews to stock medical supplies, while people who are hired and moved their families across the country are being told that there is no job. These are nurses and doctors. It's absurd that we're sitting here making requests for fiscal year 2026 when the administration is failing to honor this year's spending directives. If the executive branch can ignore Congress, then why are we even here? The choices are clear. Help preserve Congress as a co-equal branch of government, or be complicit in its demise. I sincerely hope you make the right decision. We can disagree about the size of government and the path to get America working again, but it is our decision that should happen here. So thank you very much for listening to my testimony today.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Last but not least, Representative Stansbury, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. I deeply appreciate the opportunity to appear before this committee, not only as the current ranking member of the subcommittee on the DOGE subcommittee of the Oversight Committee, but because I am a former federal employee of the White House Office of Management and Budget, and in fact was a budget examiner and was deeply involved in former efforts during the Obama administration to cut waste, fraud, and abuse using the appropriate executive power that was available. So I want to use this opportunity to talk about what I see the current administration doing and the proposals in the budget framework that was put forward last week, and talk about, one, why this is not normal, and two, why this is not legal. So I want to cover 6 areas in brief. First, let's talk about the creation of the DOGE entity by executive order and the placing of Elon Musk in charge of this entity. As I understand it, the executive has used their authority to create a new entity placed at the digital service. I actually served in the Obama administration when the digital service was established. It was created for the purpose of modernizing our federal agencies. However, as has been made clear over the last several weeks, as numerous court cases have come before the courts, it's very clear that the executive is not clear on its own authority, number one, to use executive order to create a so-called Department of Government Efficiency, the usage of an existing office within the office of the president, and is using the courts to try to backtrack on who is actually in charge of these efforts. The reason why they are doing that is because it clearly does not have the executive authority to do that. Secondly, let's talk about dismantling of entire federal agencies. This is not only not normal, it's not legal. Not normal. The normal process for creating and changing federal agencies is to use the statutory authority of Congress. Since time of the beginning of this country, the executive branch has come and worked with Congress, especially the appropriations committees and subcommittees, to put forward proposals through the president's budget and through presidential initiatives to create the congressional authority to do that. As this administration has been dismantling agencies, they are both violating the authorizations for these agencies that Congress has put forward. They are violating the constitutional separation of powers, and they are violating appropriations law. Third, let's talk about the withholding of federal funds. It is illegal for the executive branch to withhold funds. After Richard Nixon's corruption and withholding of funds during his administration, Congress passed several statutory frameworks to ensure that the president would not illegally withhold funds that were appropriated by Congress. I certainly don't need to tell the Appropriations Committee that you hold the authority to do that, but it is very clear that this administration is using tools within the Office of Management and Budget, both to slow walk the rolling out and execution of funds, to target specific funds, and is specifically frozen funds that it does not have authority to do so. There are now over a dozen court cases that have been heard in front of federal courts that have found that the administration has not complied with its authority, and it's very clear that this administration believes that they hold executive power that time and time again, both the U.S. Constitution, the courts, and Congress has asserted that they do not. We understand that this administration is going to continue to assert that authority, but it is not normal and it is not legal. Fourth, hacking government data systems. This is not normal. It is not legal. They are violating American privacy and national security by hacking and data mining data systems across the federal government. Sixth, self-dealing. In addition to data mining, federal firings, dismantling federal agencies, this administration is using the opportunity to control these funds to give themselves federal contracts, as we've seen with Elon Musk and the FAA just last week. It is very clear this administration does not have a regard for the separation of powers and the rule of law and the appropriations power and the power of the purse of Congress. And we recommend that this committee, as you are working on the next fiscal budget, use every tool in appropriations law as well as the report language and other tools of this committee to rein in the reckless, harmful, and illegal activity of this administration. And I yield back.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I appreciate all the witnesses being in here today. For that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.
No,
Thank
we're
you.
going to have questions from the witness, aren't we?
No. This is member day. They get to ask, to make their presentations. We're not asking for questions. I've got a meeting at 11, Stenny, with Chairman Cole.
The witnesses, and frankly, my three colleagues,
I was told there's no questions.
were they told they had no questions?
I was told that we had no questions.
Well, I don't know that we have prepared questions, that may be. Said no prepared questions. I'm now prepared.
Okay. Nick, you want to take over? I have a meeting with the Chairman Cole at 11 o'clock. Thank you.
Why don't we get going with it, guys? You want 5 minutes of question, Mr. Hoyer?
Could I have, I understand this is not usual.
We want to accommodate.
And I thought we were going to be able to question.
Good. Is 5 minutes fair, sir? Yeah. Okay. I recognize Mr. Hoyer for 5 minutes of questioning.
Mr. Ivy has not had an opportunity to speak, nor have you. But you've had a very quick,
I'm happy to pass on my opportunity. Are you, if you're gonna, if Mr. Hoyer is gonna pass Mr. Ivy for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate your fast rise here on the Appropriations Subcommittee. Ms. Stansbury, it's a pleasure to see you. And I appreciate your comments today and last night, frankly. But I did want to ask a couple of questions. First, I did want to ask about federal contractors. I've got quite a few in my district who have been caught up in all of this, just like government employees. Many of them have actually performed work for the federal government already, but they're behind several months in getting payment. And what that means is that they're having to lay off federal contractor employees. They're not directly government employees, but they're doing work for the federal government. And that's enabling or undermining the ability of them to continue to do work that the federal government needs. And by the way, I think to the impoundment point, this goes directly to that because we've appropriated the money for these projects to go forward. There were contracts put in place specifically for the work to be done, so there's really no issue about, presidential, discretion as to whether the money should be paid. There's already a contract in place. The work's been performed. So I wanted to get your take on that, especially under the impoundment and separation of powers aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the founding fathers were very clear when they wrote the Constitution that Congress would hold the purse. And the idea was that we would have a separation of powers between the three branches of government. Congress would create the laws, they would appropriate the money, and the executive branch is called the executive because it executes. Part of how you execute is you execute contracts, you execute payment, you execute on the laws that have been passed by Congress. We've seen since the last 6 weeks that this administration has used executive orders, OMB guidance, and actual DOJ and other federal political appointees to withhold funds that have already been contracted. In some cases, funds have already been obligated and they're trying to claw back funding. That includes at USAID as well as several of the contracts pursuant to congressional laws like the Inflation Reduction Act. This is illegal. It's both illegal impoundment of these federal funds. It is also violates the contracts that the federal government has already signed with these entities. And because this is the breaking of federal laws, normally DOJ would be the enforcer here, but of course DOJ is complicit in this activity. So that is why the states, tribal entities, and nonprofits are bringing suits along with private entities and individuals who've been harmed in the courts. And the courts are vital in making sure that the government makes good on its responsibilities.
I appreciate that. And I just want to point out before I yield back, the impact that is being had not only on the government employees, and Congressman Hoyer and I share Prince George's County, which I don't know, what's our total number of federal government employees?
I have 77,000, but that's my whole district.
Okay.
It's about 50,000, I think, between us.
Yeah, so we've got quite a few federal government employees in our district who are being really devastated by this and unfairly. I think many of them are being either pressured to leave or tricked into leaving with the so-called buyout proposal, or just outright fired, especially those targeting the probationary employees, even though there's no evidence of them doing anything incorrect or any kind of misconduct. In fact, they've got evaluations, many of them, over decades of doing outstanding work. But just quickly, the impact of this is, for example, termination of NIH trials. I had someone we had a town hall meeting on Saturday, 900 people showed up. One of them was an NIH contractor, and she was talking about how cancer research, Alzheimer's research, Parkinson's research was being terminated. And it's not like a light switch where you can just cut it back on and start it over again. You got to start from scratch. And so that means you're losing, in some instances, years, and in some instances, millions of dollars. And I picked those three diseases because I'm a cancer survivor, and so I have a strong interest in sorting out, giving them the chance to find, cures for those sorts of things. My father died from a combination of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, so I'm especially interested in it. But I appreciate your testimony. Mr. Chairman, thank you for giving me a chance to speak. Mr. Hoyer, thank you for yielding your time. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Hoyer, did you do 5 minutes?
No, but I want to thank you for allowing Mr. Ivy to speak. And I thank Ms. Stansbury for being here. I know you left a hearing and came here, but as the ranking member on the DOJ Oversight Committee, I think it's very important that we hear your testimony. And Mr. Chairman, I think it's very important, and I'd like on the record a request that we ask Mr. Musk to testify, because this is within the ambit of our jurisdiction. Obviously, he's having a very broad impact, and I think it's important for this committee to have his testimony and be able to ask him what he's doing. Thank you very much.
The request is noted. There being no other business, I'd like to thank our witness for being here today. This subcommittee stands adjourned.